Welcome to the second episode of Uncaged Sports Talk. Here on today's episode, gonna have some Phillies talk about some training camp around the NFL. I have some guests though on this second episode. I would like to introduce my friends Dan Steenkamer and Michael Boyer, two people I did the sports radio with at University of Delaware. You guys can go ahead and introduce yourselves if you would like. Dan is in the top right corner of the screen if you're watching on YouTube, and Michael Boyer's in the bottom left corner.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Luke, for having us on. I think I speak for the both of us when we were really excited to see not only that we were maybe going to have a chance to come on the show sometime as you started up this podcast, but also just that you began it in the first place and kind of kept up the Blue Hen Sports Cage name in a way with Uncaged Sports Talk here. The rollout's been really awesome. We loved listening to and watching the first episode. And so yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for thinking of us. And I know Mike is certainly looking forward to talking a lot about Philly here. So he's repping the Phils there in the bottom part of your screen. And yeah, Mike, take it away.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Michael Boyer. I'm very excited to be here with Luke. I mean, it's been a little bit, Luke, since we were
Yeah.
on the Blue Hen Sports Cage on 91.3 WVUD, but it was a very good time. So I'm very excited. And like Dan said, we're just super excited that you started this podcast, that we have an opportunity to be on it with you, talk sports once again, because certainly we definitely miss talking sports with you like we did on the radio.
Yeah.
So we're very excited about this.
It's been like since mid-May since we all were on there together since like our last episode we did.
Yeah, too long. I remember it like it was yesterday, man. And you did a great
That
job holding
episode
down the
was long
fort, Luke.
ago.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I missed like the weekly y'all going in there just talking about sports. We were talking about a lot of Philly sports because they were good at they were the talk of all professional sports in the championships. Choking though. They all choked.
Yeah, they were making it easy for me as the host, right? Like, and trying to figure out the agenda because the Phillies were doing so well. Luke, you were doing so well in predicting each game of the World Series. It was a matter of we were pretty sure we were pretty sure what the number one topic was going to be. And then as the Eagles season progressed, that made it pretty straightforward too with the Eagles' success.
For people that don't know, in the first half of the year when the Phillies were in the playoffs, I was texting Dan and someone else that we did it with, who's probably going to be on next week, Connor, that my prediction for each Phillies game, and I was perfect up until like game 3 of the World Series or game 4. Then I got a little, I think game 2 maybe is when it went awry because I got a little ahead of myself thinking they might go up 2-0 in the series against the Astros, but that was just me being a fan. But I was perfect up until that point. I was like 10-0 or whatever it was up until that point, which was insane. I was just like, that's insane. I'm predicting every game correct. Score-wise, I wasn't correct on I don't think any of them, but I was correct on who wins the game.
Hey, that was Red October. I mean, Mike, you experienced it as well. You hadn't arrived in Newark yet, but you experienced it just the same.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I went to school in Maryland, but drove back to Philly a couple times so I could go to. It was Game 3 of the NLCS I went to, the Gene Segura game, I like to call it, where he made some great plays in the field. And then Game 5 of the World Series, that it was kind of depressing because the Chaz McCormick catch.
Game. Yeah.
But and the game that Brandon Marsh did not bunt when he should have bunted, but that's okay.
Yeah,
They'll be back this year, though,
and they
right,
would have
Luke?
scored a run, but hopefully. There's only 3 teams, I think, for them to compete with. But speaking about the Phillies, that actually leads us into some Phillies talk, talking about the Phillies looking forward. At first, this is going to be a segment mainly just talking about Trey Turner, because that was the biggest topic regarding the Phillies. But he's starting to turn it around ever since that home run he had. It's only been 4 games, but he's starting to head in the right direction. I will say on that topic with Trey Turner, one thing I noticed, he seems to stand a bit far from the box. I sent Mike a picture of it, a video. He stands far away from the box and he can't hit that far. He couldn't hit that far outside pitch, especially when he's pressing and trying too much. But I think they're headed in the right direction, the Phillies, now that Trey Turner's getting going again and the bats are all just getting hot at the right time. Just about everyone's getting hot right now. So it should be a fun end to the summer for the Phillies. And I think there's only 2 other teams to worry about in the National League. I think it's the Braves and the Dodgers are the only two teams you got to worry about in the National League.
Yeah, it seems like Trey Turner, ever since they started giving him a standing ovation, has started to turn it around. He's on a 5-game hitting streak, which is something I didn't think I'd say this season. Now they are playing some less than stellar teams right
Yeah,
now in the Royals and now the Nationals, but it's definitely a good sign that Trey Turner's starting to make contact with the ball, make hard contact at least with the ball.
yeah.
But yeah, to your point, Luke, about him standing far away from the plate, I mean, I definitely see it because those sliders outside, he's like wailing at them and missing pretty good on
Look,
those, and then he's hitting the ball at the end of the bat, just like rolling it over towards second base or third base, just like a weak ground ball. So maybe he's tweaked something. Maybe he's just feeling more confident now that the fans are behind him. But definitely a good sign because when he gets going, then the whole offense is kind of one cohesive unit.
it looks like his bat isn't reaching like across the plate. Like when you look at like clips of it, looks like his bat's not reaching across the entire plate through the entire strike zone.
Yeah, I mean
Then
Trey, that's an area of concern, right? Like if he's not getting plate
yeah,
coverage, especially as he looks to keep a hitting streak going, hopefully he's gaining that level of confidence and just regaining his swing to the point where you could think about putting him at the leadoff spot with all that speed. You just need to be able to count on a certain reliable on base percentage, of course, if you want to get him back to that kind of leadoff position. But I go back to the standing ovation thing, like when the movement or the trend started online of Phillies fans saying, hey, let's go ahead and let's embrace Trey in this like difficult time for him where he's struggling on the field. Really, in all aspects of his game, he was struggling. Let's embrace him with a standing ovation, kind of just show that we're behind him and that we're rooting for him, we're pulling for him. Of course, we've been frustrated with him, but everybody knew that. He knew the fan base was frustrated with him. He sensed it, and maybe it was getting to him. So at first, I kind of rolled my eyes at the prospect of there being a kind of a corny-ish standing ovation for him, but I look back at it now and say what a good idea it was in the end because it paid dividends. I really do think that it's hardly a coincidence that he started to maybe simplify things at the plate for himself. So just feeling it wasn't necessarily just love. It was just kind of an affirmation from the Phillies fans to Trey Turner. And I can't claim that I was in that camp at first. I really was thinking at first, this is just kind of a goofy thing to do. Like he's an all-star player. He's a guy who's not exactly a rookie or anything. He's pretty used to having to play under pressure. But being in the Philadelphia sports city, I think, Mike, you were telling me you'd heard a clip of somebody talking about New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, just playing in those cities. It's different than Trey Turner's previous stops in Major League Baseball. So I think the fan base turning over a new leaf or taking the high road with Turner and giving him that applause and kind of giving him a bit of an extra kick in a positive direction really might have been, a big part of a mental difference in how he's playing. So I give it credit to the folks who came up with that idea because I dismissed it and I should not have.
yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
absolutely
that
agree.
yeah, I think it would have went bad if he like continued to struggle because I that's how I thought it was going to go at first. I thought when I heard about the standing ovation idea, I thought they were going to give him a standing ovation that first at bat. He was going to strike out, and then it was just going to be raining boos, which because it seemed like just something phony that Philly fans would do, like that sarcastic cheer almost.
Right.
And then it just turns into boos once he does have a bad result with striking out or swinging at a bad pitch and barely hitting it. I thought it was going to turn into boos. Luckily, it didn't for him, but they got lucky with that. Speaking of the Phillies, continuing on the Phillies, how far do you guys think they can go in the National League? Do you think they can get back to the World Series and reach their point again? Or are the Braves going to be too much, or the Dodgers? Are those two teams going to be too much for them to overcome? I personally think that they can get back, but they got to worry about those two teams. I'm not worried about any other team in the National League. It's two teams. The other teams are going to make, there's other teams that are going to make the playoffs, but I'm not worried about them come October.
Yeah. I think that they could make it if they get the first wild card, which I think that's really important because then you could avoid the Braves, like maybe see them possibly in the NLCS. But I think they could definitely make it back to the NLCS. I'm not going to say that they'll make it back to the World Series, but I do think it's possible. because I mean, you look at the way the team is constructed, like the lineup is really good, like whether they've shown it or not all season, like there's a lot of talent up and down the lineup. And I was a little worried about Brandon Marsh getting banged up, but it seems like he's going to be able to come back and he'll be fine. And I don't doesn't look like Reese is going to come back, but even without Reese, this team is like this team is very good. And going back to Trey Turner, if he just starts hitting, like that'll be huge. I like the Michael Lorenzen pickup. I wish they could have
Mhm.
maybe gotten another right-handed bat, but in terms of the pitching side of things, I like the way Michael Lorenzen like complements the starting rotation. And Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler need to improve. Wheeler hasn't been great since the deadline, but I mean, we know what he can do, and we know what they did in
Mhm.
the playoffs last year. So if the lineup comes together the way they're supposed to, and the pitching just does like what they did last year, at least a little bit of what they did last year, and throughout the whole season this year thus far, then I think they're going to be good, and they'll have a chance to make it back to the World Series.
Philadelphia Phillies have gone on a little bit of I don't want to say a hot streak because there have been games dropped along the way in recent weeks to inferior competition, such as the Pittsburgh Pirates. Michael and I were out in Pittsburgh. I was out there in Pittsburgh for most of the series, and Mike, you saw the whole series, right? You saw all 3 games in Pittsburgh where the Phils dropped 2 of 3, and so you get series like that, and you start to have a damper on the optimism, heading into October, but the Michael Lorenzen trade, you beat me to mentioning it, Mike, because I think especially with Nola serving up home runs and kind of not being the consistent, number 2 arm behind Wheeler, Michael Lorenzen, the fact that he in his first start with the Phillies pitched 8 innings on the road, went deep into a ball game, got the win, that really was very promising. But to say that the Phillies are for sure going to return to the World Series, doing a repeat in the NL pennant is, needless to say, very difficult to do. One team I do want to mention that isn't the Braves or the Dodgers is the Milwaukee Brewers. The NL Central is becoming a pretty good race over in that division. We know the Reds have had really good young talent this season, and the Cubs wound up being, if not buyers, they bought a little bit at the trade deadline. They certainly weren't sellers. The Cubs did not choose to sell because they were also in the race. But leading that division, it's the Milwaukee Brewers. And I know the Brewers don't have the most star-studded lineup as compared to the Phillies, but the Brewers not too long ago got Brandon Woodruff back into the fold in their starting rotation to be the number 2 guy behind Corbin Burns. And just looking at the depth of the Brewers rotation, I mean, Freddie Peralta is in the 3 spot, and Wade Miley and Adrian Hauser rounded out as the current depth charts listed over at ESPN. So I think the Brewers potentially have the pitching, and they've kind of quietly been the team that to rise and hold first place at this point in the NL Central. The Brewers, I'm not saying they would be favored against the Phillies in a series, but that's just kind of one of the teams I think you could wind up with if you're the Phillies and you're in the you're in the NLDS, right? Like it's going to be a tough road, I think, in the NL. I know the AL gets a lot of attention for being pretty deep and strong in the West and East divisions. But I do think the National League has kind of teams like the Brewers or whoever wins the NL Central. If it's the Cubs that really put it all together in the second half, somebody from the NL Central, I worry, could be overlooked a bit by this Phillies team because we do know that the Phillies really do have the star power that can match up with the Braves, that can match up with the Dodgers, and you want to see an NLCS versus one of those 2 teams. But at the same time, I think you got to be cautious of a team like the Brewers or even the young Reds if they can actually follow through at the end of the season here. Somebody who could trip you up. Whether it's in September or finally in October in the postseason.
One thing that would be cool, a team you didn't mention that it might be trending towards at this point, if the Phillies can get the 4 seed, which they should be able to if they perform how they should with their schedule remaining, and the Giants continue playing how they are, it would be Phillies versus Gabe Kapler, round 1. 2 to 3 games in Philly. That would be insane. The boos that Gabe Kapler would get during that series would be just insane. It would be so loud, deafening boos almost. But that would be the matchup. And then I think as the 4 seed, because baseball doesn't reseed right now with how they do it, they need to reseed to give like that wild card team a better matchup in the second round. But as the 4 seed currently, the Phillies would be going up against the Braves if the Braves hold the 1 seed, which they probably will. In the NLDS, which is not a great draw in that first round, your best hope would be going up against the Dodgers. and then hoping that the Braves get knocked out. Someone does the dirty work for you, like the Padres did last year. That would be the hope for you if you get in. But as of right now, those are the two teams I'm mainly worried about heading forward for the Phillies, the Braves and the Dodgers. The Brewers and the other teams, when it gets to October, they feel like teams that aren't gonna be teams that make a deep run. They feel like good regular season teams, but not playoff teams. You need the depth in the lineup for a playoff run, and the other three teams have those deep lineups, good rotations to make those deep runs. The Phillies, Braves, and Dodgers. They're the three most set up in the NL. Staying in
Yeah,
Philadelphia, though, to change the topic, moving forward to Eagles training camp. Me and Dan were actually at the open practice on Sunday, along with 50,000 other Eagles fans. That was insane there.
That was nuts.
50,000 fans for a practice.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I mean, Luke, we
Eagles
were
fans,
marveling at the upper deck, right? The upper
yeah.
deck was not packed, but
I've
had rows of people.
I've been going to the open practices for 10 years, almost at this point, however long they've been having them. I think since Chip Kelly's first year. And I've never seen it that packed. Granted, they just came off of an NFC championship, almost winning a Super Bowl. But the fact it was that packed to go watch training camp, practice we're talking about practice, is insane. I think I've heard some good stuff, though, about them in training camp. I wanted to know your guys' thoughts on them going into this season. I've heard that Jalen Hurts has had a good training camp so far. He's been looking good in training camp, been having good practices, been accurate, hasn't thrown many picks. He's not the type of QB who throws picks, but he's just been having a solid training camp overall. What are your guys' thoughts going forward on them for the regular season this year?
I think they're going to be pretty strong this year. Just thinking about how good Jalen Hurts was last year, but he could definitely like improve on some things going into this year. Just I mean, just having a better presence in the pocket, I think, is very important for Jalen Hurts, and I think that's something he's improved on like throughout the off season and the beginning of training camp. And I think that's really important for him. Like he's such a dual threat quarterback, which is huge for this team. And the receivers having AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. I mean, we all know they're very good. But I like Quez Watkins as well. I think he's going to be a good option for them if they decide to go that route because he's very speedy. He could complement AJ Brown in that way, just as Devontae Smith does, being like a smaller receiver. He's pretty fast. But I like DeAndre Swift a lot. I'm very happy with that pickup. If he can stay healthy, that'll be huge for the Eagles going into this season. But looking ahead to the first game, which is in a couple days now of the preseason, Eagles at Ravens. Looks like we'll see how the Eagles match up against the greatest preseason team in the history of
Marcus
football.
Mariota beating the streak.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, hey, he's looked good so far, so we'll see how he does. But I like him as a backup as well. So there's a lot of things to be excited about this year.
Yeah, it's funny Marcus Mariota's name comes up because honestly, one of my very surface level takeaways from public practice at the link was the pardon, one second. One moment.
I think I know what Dan was going to hint towards at that. One thing we both noticed, Mariota was very fast. We can see what he says when he is able to come back on the stream, having, I'm guessing, a call pop up. But I think that the one thing that we stood out from Marcus Mariota, he was very fast. Like, still looked very mobile for being 28, 30 almost at this point. Probably 32, maybe. I'm doing a double check on that real quick, but he still looked very mobile for being drafted almost 10 years ago at this point. He's 29 years old, and he looked mobile for being a 29-year-old.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, did you watch the quarterback documentary, Luke? Did you watch
No,
it?
I did not get a chance to fully watch it. I
I
do
didn't
have
either.
one thing to watch on Netflix for next week's episode, which I'll hint at. It just came
Ooh.
out untold. But
Oh yeah, yeah. I haven't watched that either. I
what
need
were
to
your
start
thoughts on
watching
the
things, Luke.
Mariota and the QB documentary?
So I was actually gonna ask you that because I didn't watch it, but I think it's really cool that he was on there. I know that Jalen Hurts
Mhm.
declined the opportunity to be on it, which I think is good because he has like kind of the right mindset when it comes to things like that. Like he'll be able to tell a story when it's all said and done. Hopefully, a couple Super Bowls to his name when he is finished being an NFL quarterback. But Marcus Mariota, I mean, he's a very good backup. And, obviously having a quarterback that runs like Jalen Hurts does, I mean, we see how Lamar Jackson has gotten injured a lot. So having a good backup's really important. I mean, you and I both know that, Luke, especially with
Yeah, Nick
the Nick
Foles,
Foles
Nicky
situation
Six.
back in absolutely Nicky Six. But I'm just really excited about this team. And I mean, the draft was unbelievable. I mean, getting those
Jalen
guys in
Carter
the
at
first round
9,
was just huge. Yeah,
Nolan
like
Smith
that's
at
just like
30.
incredible. I I
The
I can't believe they got Nolan Smith. I thought there was a chance at Carter, but like I mean, obviously like having the ninth pick, but getting Nolan Smith at 30, I mean that's just
the more
incredible.
he
So this
started to
team's gonna be
drop, the
set up.
more I got excited.
Yeah. He just kept dropping and dropping, and I'm like, oh dude, now's
And
the
then we got
obvious pick here, Howie.
Keely Ringo round 4.
Yeah.
Bradbury's Bradbury was not practicing at the open practice because he's has an injury he's dealing with, a small
Oh yeah.
injury. He was walking around fine, had no brace or anything on his arms. So he should be good. But having a young corner like Keely Ringo who could maybe step into a good role eventually is exciting to know. They got someone who could maybe grow and be a corner of the future. Excited to see how he progresses.
Hello,
I
folks.
want to
Sorry
see.
about that.
I
I'm
want to
back.
see if
Dan's
Dan
back. Yeah.
says the exact thing I said that he was going to say about Mariota.
Yeah,
So,
this is
what
great.
were
Great
your thoughts
experiment
on
because I was
Mariota?
completely detached briefly from the call. I apologize to our listeners and viewers. Michael and I had some renovations happening in our residence here, but but so I was going to speak about Marcus Mariota. He did look like he hadn't lost much of a step really with the speed he showed. Now, of course, he was wearing the red jersey, so hard to know exactly what to account for with that. But I do like Mariota as the guy whose style similarly, you have a backup who makes sense to back up Jalen Hurts. You don't have to modify the offense too much if you had to turn it to Marcus. God forbid if something were to happen to number one. But elsewhere from from Mariota on offense, the Eagles receiving core. Not that that's a takeaway from practice or something I just learned from practice, but I was watching a segment on like FS1 this morning about how Jalen Hurts was picked ahead of Joe Burrow in the NFL Top 100 Players of 2023. Which of course Hurts versus Burrow is its own debate, but what came up along the way is the fact that the Eagles receiving core really is not that far behind the Bengals top receivers in terms of the strength of that unit. Like the Eagles have so many offensive skill position weapons. We know Goddard is an FCS product at tight end who's very talented, has proven himself in the league. So, and then from there, the offensive line is going to be the band's back together there. So it's hard to find a true weakness for the Birds. So I don't know if you, Luke, if I sounded like if I was a broken record with you on Mariota, but I really think the Eagles-Ravens preseason game is going to be fun because the Ravens don't lose in the preseason. It does not happen under John Harbaugh, at least in recent history. And the Ravens aren't exactly, foreign to defending a mobile quarterback like Mariota, who I'm guessing we'll see in the majority of the beginning parts of this preseason game on Saturday. So good regional, Philly versus Baltimore game.
Mm-hmm.
Mike and I always enjoy the Philly-Baltimore games, so should be a good time.
Yeah, I'm hoping Mariota can pull that one off in preseason. It would be really cool to see that happen. But looking forward for the Eagles, my biggest worry is injuries. I think there's only 2 teams to worry about in the NFC for the Eagles to compete with when it actually matters, because I think they'll get to the playoffs. And then when you get to the playoffs, I think the teams like the Seahawks, Giants, Lions, I don't think those teams are true threats to get somewhere in the NFC to get to the Super Bowl. It's the Cowboys and Niners are the 2 teams you got to worry about. But the biggest thing that can derail this Eagles season, as much as we were just talking about Mariota, the biggest thing that can derail this season would be Jalen Hurts getting hurt. You can survive other injuries elsewhere, but if Hurts goes down, your season might be over. Your season probably is over if he goes down.
Isn't
For
that
an
what they said
extended
about
period of
Carson
time.
Wentz? If Carson Wentz goes down, then
I don't think Mariota is Nick Foles. So,
well, we don't know that. Mariota's been a starter in this league, right, Mike? I mean, it's been a little
I
bit.
mean, I like him as the backup.
I mean, Nick Foles was a former starter too. Like, honestly, am I crazy to see some similarities? Like, Nick Foles was a starter, became a full-time backup, right? Mariota was a full-time starter, now is a backup.
I'm gonna bring up a Cage reference. Dan will probably laugh at this. That Mike wasn't there at the time. A Blue Hen Sports Cage reference, but like the first ever episode we did, or maybe the second episode, Geno Smith was playing Marcus Mariota. I'm burned by Marcus from this. We were having a debate about who's better, Marcus Mariota or Geno Smith. Dan was on the side of Geno, and at the time, I was on the side of Marcus Mariota, and they were both at the time just You couldn't care. Both were bad at the time, except their perception was bad at least. But Dan definitely was proven right on that argument. I went with Mariota on that, and he just proved me wrong throughout the year.
Hey, that's why Geno Smith carried me all of last NFL season. I could lean back on that and say, hey, I got that take right on record. I was on record. He's my guy, Geno Smith. So
that was funny, having that debate about Geno and Mariota.
Yeah, Mike, they
Mariota always seems to come off.
He never writes back. He doesn't write back.
Speaking about quarterbacks, there's another quarterback having some training camp problems. It was in California, but in Dallas now because their training camp's in California. I'm gonna show a clip real quick of this particular quarterback. Dak Prescott has been struggling mightily in training camp from some stuff I've heard. Just yesterday, or 2 days ago when this podcast goes up, he threw 2 picks in a row to Trayvon Diggs. He had like 15 interceptions last year. He's just been struggling mightily bad in Dallas, in training camp. And if he struggles again, that's going to be Dallas's biggest worry. People say Dak Prescott chokes a lot. He's like another Tony Romo, I've heard some people say. But that's their biggest worry. If they don't choke, their biggest worry is choking. If they don't choke, they can get over the hump. But Dak's been turning the ball over. The first few years of his career, he never really turned the ball over. But currently he has been. Last year and in training camp so far this year in training camp sometimes can be an indicator of what's to come in the season. But I just want to know your thoughts on Dak Prescott heading into this year.
He's going to be it's going to be a little scary for some Cowboys fans, I think. That video you showed just now, I saw that a couple times myself, and just severely underthrown. I mean, I don't know what's up with him, but that is just pretty atrocious from Dak Prescott. And as Eagles fans, we can only hope that keeps up into the season. But I just think he's super inconsistent with his accuracy. Like sometimes he looks like borderline elite, and other times he looks like Geno Smith or Marcus Mariota out there. So I don't know, guys. Well, you know what? I'm not going to write off Geno. He looks like Marcus Mariota sometimes. We'll say that. But Dak Prescott, I mean, just not consistent. I mean, you never know what you're going to get out of him. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing like if he like gets an extended amount of snaps, like maybe a few drives in the preseason, just seeing how he does against like other teams. You know, I mean, Trayvon Diggs, he's obviously very good. So like throwing an interception to him, like that's going to happen. But just like, I don't know, not looking too good so far for Dak. And last year he was definitely regressing. So I mean, it's trending downward for Dak. So we'll see how he does this year. But if he continues to play like that, then the Eagles will have no problem winning the division.
Yeah.
I don't want to be caught in the moment too much overreacting to over-circulated Cowboys training camp clips. Like, I'm sure there are quarterbacks elsewhere in the league who have had like rogue bad days and
Yeah.
multiple INTs in one practice and all this stuff. But I think in the greater context of the fact we saw, which Cowboys defender was it who was? I want to keep this podcast clean. I don't want to like verbatim quote what like
It
the
was
trash talk was.
Trayvon Diggs. He said, shut your BA up. I'm not gonna even say the other word.
Yeah, so
He said, shut your butt up, basically. Is a way
yeah.
to keep it clean.
and that trash talk's probably no big deal, but like because it's the Cowboys and because it's Dak and Dak is like a popular player to like go after. And I just think Dak is also popular to kind of go after for viral clips like the INTs in this camp this fall because we have a hard time making sense of him. Like he does need to perform a bit better in the postseason in order to kind of prove himself to kind of enter that back part of the top 10 of NFL quarterbacks. But I look at his regular season numbers last year. Dak was just behind Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow in QBR. Now QBR doesn't necessarily tell you everything, but like I feel for Dak because I almost wonder if at this point, like the Cowboys continue to be such a like not poorly run, but it's always a bit chaotic in how they're run at the top from Jerry Jones down and Jerry's son. That I just wonder if like Dak Prescott's not going to pan out to the level he could help a team achieve to, which I think is an NFC Championship game, simply because the Cowboys will inevitably have the Stephen A. Smith preyed on downfall of things going wrong in the playoffs. And a lot of that does fall on Dak's shoulders. But I'm just looking for the early regular season indicators of the fact that this training camp viral spat of interceptions isn't such a big deal because it is the Cowboys defense we're talking about. The Cowboys defense is it's a tough defense practice against. They have a good roster. The Cowboys have one of the best three rosters in the conference. Yeah, the Cowboys have a top roster in the conference. But I think most importantly for Dak, he generally has a pretty good track record of playing against NFC East opponents. Like I do think the Cowboys could win the division. The Eagles have the better overall team, but it's very hard to go back-to-back in the NFC East or in most divisions in football. But generally, you guys know better than me, the history of the NFC East, changes hands a lot. So I think the most important thing is how Prescott plays in the regular season against those NFC East opponents, because that's going to be the real meat and potatoes of the schedule that determines how the Cowboys fall in the NFC seeding. Because if the Cowboys can get more home games than not in the playoffs, and maybe that helps, Dak advance a bit further with his squad, but he's under so much pressure. I mean, just think about if somebody like Kirk Cousins, who I think is a similar player, like if Kirk Cousins was under this much pressure with the Cowboys, he would have bad days like Dak had too in camp, because we know Cousins struggles on Monday Night Football and like primetime things like that is the narrative. So I wonder, like, what if you put Prescott on somebody, even like the Falcons, right? Like just put Dak Prescott on the Falcons. I think that could turn into a different kind of division contender over in the NFC South. But because Dak is on the Cowboys and it's always going to be in the news cycle, and he has not inflated expectations of himself necessarily, but just the extra scrutiny. It almost reminds me of the Johnny Manziel documentary that we were just watching. That actually, I was just watching. I was telling Mike about because Johnny Manziel had all kinds of extra bright lights on him after winning the Heisman and being speculated to even go to the Cowboys in the draft. And Manziel and Prescott are not remotely the same in terms of like their personal makeup or like their decision making off the field. I'm not trying to suggest that, because Dak has a pretty sterling record by and large, as the person, the man. So, but I just think it's hard. He's not the transcendent quarterback that the Mahomes and the Burrows or even the Jalen Hurts could be potentially. He's probably not that. He's probably not likely to become that. So, being in that pressure cooker of Dallas and Jerry World, I just think that's doing a number on him eventually. Like it's starting to come to a head here, and it just feels like too much. The Twitter voices, everybody coming for him in camp. Now he's doing it to himself. Like these clips aren't great, but a lot of it's what he's wearing on his helmet.
Yeah, I think that leads to extra scrutiny. I think it also can sometimes lead to him being viewed as sometimes better by certain people. Some people view him as like a top 8, but I feel like he's more like he's around the 8th quarterback in the league. Me and Dan were talking about it when we on the way back from the open practice. But part of that could also be the fact he's in Dallas. Like if Kirk Cousins is in Dallas instead, people might have Kirk Cousins rated higher than Dak or vice versa. Part of that's Dallas, part of it isn't. He's around that Kirk Cousins range of a quarterback. But overall, if he does have struggles again this year, that'll be their ultimate downfall. Their season will go as far as Dak can take them. Speaking is going as far as something can take you. If you get a new car, that can take you a long way. I just want to let you all know to head over and visit my friend Dan the Man Stanley at Sheridan Nissan, where they will hook you up with a new car. Just let them know Luke Sarenka sent you. Now we can go into Luke, the next edition of Luke's list. I know Dan was very excited about this, about seeing this episode. I was giving him some hints. I think you guys, if you guys looked over the list for the episode of stuff that I wanted to talk about on this episode, that Luke's list was going to have that Luke's list was going to be about, this episode was going to be about like the top 10 players to watch in preseason currently coming into this season. Coming into this preseason, actually, but it's the top 10 players to watch going into preseason, which should be pretty interesting. There's a lot of players. I even got a Delaware player as an honorable mention. You guys know who it'll be, but I'll get into it without further ado. Starting at number 10 for the top 10 players to watch in preseason is Trey Sermon, running back from Philadelphia. I think the biggest reason I want to pay attention to him is because there is a debate about if he's going to make the roster over Rashard Penny currently. A lot of people have said that Philadelphia is high on Trey Sermon, and if he impresses in preseason, he might be able to try to steal that job. But the Eagles might also keep him on the roster because they're high on him here in Philly. At number 9 is Tyjae Spears, running back from Tennessee. Tyjae Spears they just drafted him this year, and a lot of running backs tend to shine in preseason. And he could maybe be a successor to Derrick Henry as Derrick Henry's getting older. Tyjae has some speed. At number 8 is Kelee Ringo, another Philly product. Another Georgia product, too, a Philly Bulldog. Kelee Ringo, a year ago, may have been drafted in the first round, but he struggled a bit this year, so he dropped to around the 4th round. So I like where the Eagles got him, and he can eventually maybe progress into a future starting cornerback for us, which if he can get back to form, how he performed a year ago in college, that's very helpful for the Eagles. Coming in at number 7, Demario Douglas. I saw a clip of him yesterday. I showed you guys a clip of him earlier before we came on here. Demario Douglas is a receiver for the Patriots who's been just insane so far in in training camp. He's just been having insane routes. I'm going to show the clip now. He's been beating every Patriots corner, they're saying. He leads them in receptions and touchdowns, I believe. He's just been insane. And for a rookie, I want to see what he can do in the preseason playing against actual competition. But here's a short clip of Demario Douglas and some of his routes. Some of those routes are just insane. He's breaking quickly, quick break, looks like he has some good speed, and they're not able to cover him. He's getting great separation on those routes and those one-on-one situations. So I want to see how he does in an actual game. Coming in at number 6 is another receiver, Rashee Rice from Kansas City. I believe they drafted him in the 2nd round this year. And I just want to see what the Chiefs can do with another receiver, with a rookie receiver, see how he does with Mahomes. It's a taller receiver. I believe he's like 6 foot, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm interested to see what he can do there. Maybe give Mahomes another option, maybe grow into a number 1 option eventually because he has the height and weight. He's 6'1", 205, which is a prototypical receiver, your average receiver in the NFL. So he could turn into something. Then I got Jonathan Mingo at number 5 from Carolina. He was drafted in the second round at Ole Miss. Just about the same reason for Rashee Rice, but I like Jonathan Mingo's situation in Carolina. He might be able to be that number 1 receiver there because their other options are Adam Thielen, he's very old, and DJ Chark, who he's had some good stints here and there, but Jonathan Mingo, a rookie, I want to see what he can do, see if he can be a good number 1 option for Bryce Young. Then I got Cedric Tillman. I saw a statement about him from Randy Moss, which is why I have him on here. Randy Moss the other day said that Cedric Tillman is the best young receiver to enter the NFL in 15 years, which seems like an insane statement to me. But he did have 2 receptions, 50 yards in the Hall of Fame game, which the Hall of Fame games nobody's playing almost. Sometimes all backups. But I want to see what Cedric Tillman can do in preseason. See if there's actually some hype around it. See if he's actually see the hype. I want to see if he can live up to what Randy Moss said. At number 3 is John Mechie. I want to see what he can do after having a year off from leukemia. He was really good in college. Without some injuries, he may have been a first or second round pick, but he slid a little because of the leukemia and some injuries he had in college. At number 2, this guy I'm really high on in Buffalo, Dalton Kincaid, their tight end they drafted in the first round this year. I want to see what he can do in Buffalo in preseason because he's high on my list for fantasy football targets too. He's like the tight end I want to wait on for fantasy football. So I'm very interested to see what he can do there in Buffalo this year. And it gives Josh Allen another weapon because if if Dalton Kincaid turns out to be good, that makes their offense a lot better than last year. Gives him a true tight end threat. At my honorable mentions, I got Dwayne McBride from Minnesota. They just drafted him this year. He could maybe turn into something. Now that they don't have Dalvin Cook, he's going to probably take over that Alexander Madison role from last year and years prior. He could maybe grow into something. Same reason I got Tyjae Spears on here. I got Britton Covey. He's my favorite player on the Eagles. I'm a huge fan of Covey. At the Super Bowl, he had a punt return. I got hype as it was insane. I went crazy when he did it. When he had the punt return. He's my favorite player. I want to see what he can do like with actual receiving routes. He's not actually my favorite player, but one of them. I just like seeing him. Every time he gets tackled, Mike knows this probably from watching him. Looks like he gets his head taken off. Looks like he just gets murdered, but he just pops right back up, which is why I like him. He fights hard. And then from Delaware, Dan and Mike can give their thoughts on him real quick. I got Thyrick Pitts out of a receiver for New England. I want to see what he can do in preseason, see if he has any shot to make the roster. He'd have to probably have an insane preseason game or 2, but I want to see what he can do, given he's from Delaware where we all went. And then my number 1, a receiver from Miami, Devon Achane. It's another one of those running backs. I want to see what he can do fantasy purposes. And they haven't had a running back to go with that team in a while. He's got some speed. If he can do good in preseason and he can show flashes to be a number 1 running back, that would be a huge help for that offense if they can get a number 1 running back and he can turn into that. Because that's the biggest thing they're missing on that offense, a running back. I want to know your guys' thoughts on this list, on the second edition of Luke's list. And then I'll bring on Luke's question of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time on the honorable mention section, but since you invited thoughts about Pitts, I think Mike and I would agree. Pitts is, well, he was a great number one receiver at Delaware for multiple years. He grew into a wide receiver one kind of role on offenses that did have multiple talented receivers at UD. But Pitts is great with the contested catch. He has the length and speed to be kind of that X receiver alone outside the numbers. He showed that at the Division One FCS level against NFL secondaries. Maybe Pitt's role looks a little different, but I know the Patriots in general could really use receiver help. They do have Juju Smith-Schuster, and I think they're overpaying Devontae Parker too, if my memory is correct. So
Yeah.
generally, that whole offense needed a whole reset from last season's nightmare of not really having a true OC or play caller in New England for Mac Jones' development. So now Mac Jones gets Bill O'Brien back in terms of having a true offensive mind in the building. And Pitts, if you're a young receiver, I think there are nothing but possible targets to share and to spread the wealth in New England, because there are a couple proven starters in this league who are on the roster. And other than that, it's fair game. So I know the Patriots still probably won't be the most pass happy team, but I'm looking forward to ideally seeing Pitts on the roster in these preseason games, these first couple maybe. And he'll likely be fighting for his job, though, as time goes on. It's such a competitive atmosphere across the league in these first two preseason weeks. But just to talk about Pitts, and I know Mike might also have, just have any other words about Pitts, but as well as Mike, I'm sure you have thoughts about Trey Sermon too, because Sermon's a recognizable name at running back in the NFL. But I do wonder about where he falls in this Eagles team, because Kenny G is still there, right? Kenneth Gainwell is still in place, and you have Boston Scott elsewhere on the depth chart. So I kind of wonder if there is going to be a path for Trey.
The battle for Trey, from what it seems like, is against Rashad Penny. Like they play the same type of role, so that's where his battle is.
Yeah,
He'd have to steal Penny's
yeah.
role, because Penny has injury history.
Well, they both
which
do.
Could scare the Eagles.
I think they both do, right? Sermon and Penny.
Sermon had some injury history his first 2 years, but that's where his battle is. If he can impress and maybe steal that spot, or they keep 5 running backs.
Yeah, I really like your list, Luke. It's very good. I like the mention of Tyreek Pitts. Obviously, since he was a Delaware player and he was very good. Got the Delaware state flag behind me, but I absolutely like the mention of Britton Covey as well. I mean, you could not be more correct about him looking like he gets absolutely destroyed out there every time he gets tackled. But he's just a tough guy, man. He's a little guy, but he just gets right back up. He's pretty fast, pretty shifty, and I think, I mean, just seeing him in a different role, and like other than punt and kickoff returns, it'll be really interesting in the preseason, because you never actually see him out there with anything other than in special teams during the regular season. So maybe we'll get to see how he runs some routes. So that's a very interesting player, and I'm glad you put him on your list, because I mean, he's someone that doesn't really get talked about too much. I mean, I remember last year the security at the link didn't believe that he was a player, so he had to park with the fans. So yeah, it's good that you put him.
I saw something last year on him. I remember seeing on him. Bear Brooks from NBC Sports Philadelphia, I believe it was, said Britton Covey actually reminds him of Wes Walker almost. I think he said it was either Wes Walker or Julian Edelman, one of the two, both smaller receivers. So it has me interested to see what he can do. I remember seeing some routes from Covey last year in training camp. I want to see what he can do actually getting some targets in a receiver role, because he is fairly young, has some time where he can maybe grow into a number 4 or 3 for a slot receiver, slot guy in the league. But I want to see what he can do actually getting targets.
Absolutely. Yeah, he is an interesting player to watch. And talking about Cedric Tillman as well, I mean, the fact that Randy Moss had that much high praise for him is really interesting. So just seeing like what he can do in the preseason, the hype around him, I mean, should be pretty cool to see. So I'm very excited to see that. That was a cool note that you put in around about Randy Moss, because I remember hearing about Cedric Tillman a little bit, but I did not know about that comment that Randy Moss made to him. And I also like Dalton Kincaid as well. Like you said, the Bills could definitely use like a tight end threat such as him, if he can pan out to be that for them, help their offense a lot because we know they've struggled a lot in the playoffs. Josh Allen might need a little bit more help, especially with maybe like a big tight end such as Kincaid.
Mhm.
So maybe that'll work out. But overall, very interesting list, and I think it's a very good list overall.
Yeah, well,
For our last,
I could jump in one more thing about the list just to make a quick mention. Mechie's
Mhm.
inclusion is great. That has the chance.
Yeah.
It's already a great story that he's decently high up, potentially on the depth chart, and a potential to earn more time. Yeah, I really am interested in tracking that. So I'm glad that he was included as well. Just to throw that in there, just to toss that in as we wrap that up.
Before we wrap up today, I want to introduce a segment that we started to do in the second half of the year on the Blue Hen Sports Cage. I'm gonna turn this into a question of the week instead of question of the day. Luke's question of the week. Out of the guys on that list or anyone else in the league that I did not name, who is one player that you're each interested to see in preseason?
That's a good question, Luke. I mean, I'm interested to see like a lot of them, but I like Ringo a lot, honestly. Being a Georgia guy, I mean, that should be pretty interesting to see what he does with this team. Also interested to see Sermon as well. I think for me, with all the Philly guys, to see like who can make the team because the team's pretty well rounded. That is
Mhm.
someone I'm definitely interested in seeing.
For me, I mean, your list seems to be a lot of guys who are under the radar too, but you did open up to the
Yeah.
whole league. I mean, so there are certain stars, of course, who have certain levels of intrigue. Odell Beckham Jr. to bring Baltimore back into the conversation. I think Odell. It's easy to forget before the injury they had in that Super Bowl with it was the Rams, that Rams era for OBJ. Like OBJ could have wide receiver one type years left in him. It's hard to picture just with the injury history. And now, of course, he's healthy at this time and seems to be all getting rave reviews and rave stats out of Ravens camp. But the Ravens so desperately need stability at receiver that like Odell Beckham does have the high ceiling involved. But there could be a low floor because unfortunately, he's been through a lot with his body.
Mhm.
The Ravens could be a factor in the AFC at large, not just the AFC North, but you think about the best teams in the division, or the best team singular, which is the Cincinnati Bengals. They're loaded at receiver. I touched on that briefly, talking about the Eagles. So the Bengals have receivers. The Bills have receivers. The Bills have two tight ends now, as we kept talking about Kincaid. And it's just, will the Ravens have the kind of options on the perimeter for Lamar Jackson to be able to, in the playoffs, have the help to get by the top kinds of quarterbacks who are elsewhere in the AFC. So that's why I look at OBJ, especially like the first game that he plays versus the Eagles. I'm sure he won't be on the field at all, but he'll be at least with the
Yeah,
team
first preseason,
in the preseason.
he might
If he
get
gets
like a
some preseason
drive, but
snaps, it's going to be If he gets a single preseason drive, it'll be a lot of attention for all valid reasons. So I'm
Keely
definitely looking
Ringo
forward to
can shut
seeing
him down.
Odell. And I even love seeing Zach Wilson. Like Zach Wilson, the Jets I think are purposely putting out a lot of
Mhm.
positive comments about him, hoping to keep his value up down the line if there's a team that maybe would want to be interested in a trade to kind of get a reclamation project of sorts. That Zach Wilson could make sense for a team that like has an injury later in camp or in the early part of the regular season. So Zach Wilson's going to have a ton of opportunities provided to him in terms of live snaps in preseason because the Jets, I'm sure, would love to put some quality tape out there of him, be able to show the team, hey, he has games on film now where he actually looks like a more than competent NFL player. The early signs from the Hall of Fame game were Zach Wilson generally looked like he, had looked a little more comfortable, maybe a bit more of having the positive words of Aaron Rodgers in his ear. It can be helpful. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying on the star side, OBJ for me, and on the low profile side, Zach Wilson, because it seems like Wilson's
Mhm.
profile has just shrunken, with Aaron
Yeah.
Rodgers' arrival.
For that list, the one thing I was trying to do for the most part, keep it between like 1, 2-year, 3-year guys, and young guys, like under the radar guys that people might not know the name of, because those are the guys who usually have like the big preseason to make a name for themselves, make it on fantasy rosters, which that's coming up. I might have an episode about that
Well,
soon.
I've got a tight end. If you
But
don't get Kincaid, I have a tight end suggestion for you, Luke, who fits that mold, that description you just said. is Tucker Kraft with the Packers. Another South Dakota State tight end product.
The biggest problem there is they got the Luke Musgrove. They drafted 2 this year, so they drafted 2 tight ends.
I know they did pick up multiple tight ends in the draft, but Kraft is one of them, and he could well earn it. He could earn some extra time over time. I remember. No surprise that I would be vouching for an FCS guy, but having seen a lot of Tucker
hearing
Kraft,
about him. Yeah, for the Eagles potentially. Eagles were interested in him for backup to Dallas Goedert, but they obviously didn't go that route. They kept drafting a lot of defense, but just very excited with that list. I want to see some of those guys on that list, and hopefully with your OBJ mention, if he does touch the field, I'd actually like to see that because I don't think Slay's touching the field. Where Bradbury, so corner 1 is probably going to be Avante. Corner 2 is probably going to be Keeley. Keeley's going to get some playing time in this preseason game. So if OBJ plays that first drive, see Keeley shut down OBJ. That would be huge to see. But that'll wrap it up for this episode of Uncaged Sports Talk. I do want to do one more thing. For the people watching on YouTube, I'm going to show my business card. If you guys can see it, the green screen's kind of cutting it out. I'll post a picture online because the green screen's cutting it out right now. But if anyone wants to comment about it and is willing to hand them out to people, take a few and hand them out to a bunch of people, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to post it on Twitter and Instagram, a picture of it, and just leave a comment or a DM or even comment on the YouTube if you're willing to do that. That'll wrap things up here on the second episode of Uncaged Sports Talk. It was nice having you guys on today. Next week, I might try to have some more people on from the Blue Hen Sports Cage. And I already hinted at one thing that we might talk about next week. That Manziel documentary.
Oh yeah, that's a great tease, Luke. I'm looking
Give
for
myself some time to watch it.
That. Oh yeah, I told Mike I already watched the doc. I ate it in one sitting, to use that metaphor. So it was very. I mean, I smile about it, but it really was kind of a moving documentary too. Pretty serious topics touched on. So it definitely is recommended viewing before next time's episode. So thanks, Luke, for having us on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. It was a very good time.
It was nice having you guys on. I appreciate you guys coming on. I'd like to have you guys on again in the future. But that'll wrap things up here on the second episode of Uncaged Sports Talk. I'm Luke Soranka. That was Dan Steenkamer and Michael Boyer. For next week, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. And make sure to tune in next week as well.